Hey, very glorious misfit and lovers of all things paranormal and horror. Get ready to embark on a spine tingling adventure into the twisted world of the Paranormal Misfit podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy, the fearless guide through the dark realms of horror, supernatural, and everything that goes bump in the night. So grab yourself a tantalizing, tasty beverage, snuggle up in your comfiest nook, and brace yourselves for the bone chilling stories that will have you on the edge of your seat. Good evening, all my Misfit ghouls. It's another episode of The Paranormal Misfit, and per the usual, I am your host, Chrissy, and tonight's discussion will be revolving around Mothman, because this month is Mothman's, we'll call it his birthday month, right? All right, so let's go. All right, so giving back on the history, I'm sure everyone's heard of Mothman, right? Because we have the Mothman Prophecies as one of the big movies that kind of highlights him. I've never watched it. I haven't had a chance to, and I'm having a hard time finding it. So if you can tell me where you find it streaming, where I don't have to pay like $7, $8 to do it, please let me know. Anyways, moving on. So picture it. November 15th, 1966, two couples from Point Pleasant, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millett, told police they had seen a large white creature whose eyes glowed red standing on the side of the road near the TNT area, the site of the former World War II munitions plant. Oh, sorry, everyone. Linda Scarberry described it as a slender, muscular man, about 7 feet tall with white wings, and said that she was unable to discern its face due to the hypnotic effect of his eyes. Mm, drinking some nice hot tea. Distressed, the witnesses drove away at high speed and said that the creature flew after their car, making a screeching sound. It pursued them as far as Point Pleasant city limits. The next few days, other people reported similar sightings. After local newspapers reported it, two volunteer firemen who saw it said that it was a large bird with red eyes. Mason County Sheriff George Johnson commented that he believed that the sightings were due to an unusual large heron he termed a shitepoke. Contractor Newell Partridge told Johnson that when he aimed the flashlight at the creature in the nearby field, its eyes glowed red like bicycle reflectors. Additionally, he blamed buzzing noises from his television set and the disappearance of his German Shepherd on the creature. Wildlife biologist Robert L. Smith at the West Virginia University told reporters that descriptions and sightings of all fit that of the sandhill crane, a large American crane almost as tall as a man with 7-foot wingspan, featuring circles of reddish coloring around the eyes. The bird may have wandered out of its migration route and therefore was unrecognized at first because it was not native to the region. And then as this grew popular, the Batman TV series had a fictional superhero who not created. The fictional superhero Batman and all his rogue galleries were prominently featured in the public eye. While the villain Killer Moth did not appear in the show, the comic book influence of both him and Batman are believed to have some to have influenced the coinage of the name Mothman in the local newspapers. Following the December 15th, 1967, the collapse of the Silver Bridge and the death of 46 people, the incident gave rise to the legend and connected Mothman to the collapse. According to Georgian newspaper, I'm not going to try and say that one. Its Russian ufologists claim that Mothman sightings in Moscow foreshadowed the 1999 Russian apartment buildings. As I said in Mothman, there is a movie that is around the lore of it. So you have the Mothman Prophecies, made in 2002, which is a major motion picture loosely based on the 1975 book of the same name by John Keel. And let's see. So, as we all know, so this episode is airing September 22nd. So this past weekend, which is now the weekend before, was, the Mothman Festival, which the first Mothman Festival kicked off in 2002. And this began after brainstorming creative ways for people to visit Point Pleasant, which, I mean, now it's really popular. According to the event organizer, Jeff Walmsley, the average attendance for the Mothman Festival is estimated to be about 10 to 12,000 people per year. A 12-foot tall metallic statue of the creature, created by the artist and sculptor Bob Roach, was unveiled in 2003, and then the Mothman Museum and Research Center opened up in 2005. The festival is held on the third weekend of every September, hosting guest speakers, vendor exhibits, pancake eating contests, and a hayride of tours. Let's see. I hit that one. I have the websites of Mothman Festival if anyone wants to give it a good look. So, mothmanfestival.com, obviously. They're celebrating the legend. They got good FAQs. Red Eye Winged Legend. Got some awesome shirts. Different attractions and events. They even have bands. And then, you could go walk around all of the different things. They got cosplayers, bus tours. And it's interesting because whenever I look up Mothman, there's a lot of articles, right? And there's people who have written like their own papers on Mothman. And then, you have like the historical, like how did this come to be kind of thing. So we have one guy that wrote, so it is interesting as far as cryptids. It's pointed out that the Mothman myth has a definitive start date and location. After the initial report of the two young couples in West Virginia, newspapers in the area began to run with the story. And a lot of people, this is where, they kind of find all the information. So for this guy who wrote his paper, which is History Student Tells the Story of Mothman. So he said he looked at the newspaper articles and then he looked at the books that were written on the topic. He said there's the ufologist John Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecies, which he looked into. More recently, the media constructed around the Mothman myth, various documentaries, and then the Point Pleasant Mothman Festival. He uncovered far more than the cryptid's origins. He found a snapshot of the small town Americana built into the fabric of the myth. Take, for example, the area of Point Pleasant where Mothman was first sighted. So where the sighting happened, obviously, as I stated before, in the historical part, is that the spot is known as the TNT area. So named for factories used to produce explosives during World War II. After the war, the factories were abandoned and the area grew over, despite the fact that TNT was still reportedly being stored on site and contaminating the local environment. Once news came out about possible environmental pollution, as some people began to speculate, if this is where the thing irradiated, it was more of a radioactive assignment than an initial sighting. The myth may have also benefited from this time period's fascinations of aliens and UFOs, which itself was possibly born out of the Cold War fears. So this writer definitely thinks that there's an element to some of the Cold War era, watching the skies, looking for UFOs, things of that nature. In the article about the first sightings, one of the witnesses specifically said this wasn't a UFO. So I think that in relation that makes sense. Against the backdrop of the Mothman myth, that's where this thing kind of took flight, right? So there's a series of sightings from people all over Point Pleasant, and it's only just in Point Pleasant. And then it slowly moved outward. Eventually, there were Mothman sightings in other places of the United States and then international. And, as I stated earlier, from the historical fact, people in Russia were saying that was Mothman brought on the bombing of those Russian apartment buildings. The sightings in Point Pleasant stopped after a tragedy, he added. In 1967, a year after the initial sighting, the Silver Bridge, a major route in and out of town, collapsed, killing up to 40 people. Afterwards, people began claiming that they had seen the Mothman standing on the bridge the day before, possibly as an omen of the disaster to come. Even so, the town has embraced its legend, and you got the annual Mothman Festival in Point Pleasant draws in more tourists than the town's actual population. It boasts it boasts the Mothman Museum and a statue of the figure that stands prominently downtown. The history of the urban legend is fascinating to uncover, but it also makes you wonder the myths behind the history. How do people come up with these myths, and what's the purpose that they serve? So, to be clear, I don't think Mothman is real. This is the writer, by the way. To be fair, I don't think Mothman is real, but I do think that there's a combination of motivators for people who reported these sightings. These are people who saw something and it's unclear of what they saw. I'm sure that there are people who are reporting seeing these things for attention, and there's people that are in between. I wouldn't be surprised if one of the motivators is to spread an incubation of this myth and is this small town. Everyone knows everybody, everybody hears and sees something. So in this case, these people saw something interesting and they just kind of want to stand out from the crowd, right? Eventually, following the collapse of the Silver Bridge, it became a here's meaning to why something bad happened. And then it eventually became an economic draw for this small town. So as I said, Mothman Festival is the third weekend of September. There's a West Virginia public broadcasting article. So Mothman Legacy has ties to ancient folklore. So let's dive into this one a little bit. Salem, what are you doing? My cat's laying on the floor. He's looking awfully plump and also looking like he might have got into some catnip. Okay, sorry. Let's see. Da, 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 da. Okay, the winged cryptid has gone on to appear in books, films, and TV. A new documentary um, by filmmaker Seth Breedlove explores the ancient historical roots of the Mothman and looks into the legend today. He spoke with Eric Douglas by Zoom to discuss the documentary called Mothman Legacy. So, what prompted Breedlove to write this was, or come up with this documentary, was he was having a conversation with someone about the Mothman story, and they pointed out some similarities between Mothman and other winged creatures throughout mythology. They made an interesting connection between Mothman and the banshees from the Irish and Scottish folklore that involves this creature that heralds some sort of oncoming death or disaster and typically has red glowing eyes. That's really interesting. And then the interesting fact about this is obviously the Appalachia in West Virginia, especially, that was settled largely by Scottish and Irish immigrants. Did those immigrants bring that folklore with them? And then it just gained a foothold and took a life of its own over time. What's really interesting to the to Seth is that he was being able to look at not just a creepy creature, but a bigger story, but a bigger look into the mythology and the legends of folklore in general. So then he's asked, what did you learn when you started digging into that? Seth responds, I think that we learned that there's a history of these similar creatures, not just in Irish and Scottish, but kind all around the world. I mean, Hindu mythology, I'm so sorry if I say this name wrong, guys. Gardua, which is a winged creature that would precede or portend disaster. And interesting enough, John Keel, who wrote the Mothman Prophecies, was originally going to title his book The Year of the Gardua. What do the stories like Mothman tell us about ourselves? Why do we enjoy these kind of stories? And this is interesting. So Seth responds, I've always said that there's a correlation between subjects like this become popular, and the current state of the world. I've always felt that there's an escapism, as weird as it sounds. They definitely can directly tell us things about human beings and ourselves and how we pass along these stories. I think if there's anything, the Mothman, the Mothman legacy is actually about is it's about the legacy of storytelling. And so, obviously um, this doc director, Seth, is asked, do you believe in Mothman? And he says, not to cop out with this answer, but I think it kind of depends on the version of Mothman. There's 8 different interviews in the film with people who claim to be witnesses, and none of them describe the exact same thing. So I think there's something going on. I think there's still something going on that maybe we don't understand. And as to whether or not that something is a giant humanoid creature with wings and glowing red eyes, I'm not positive. I do think there's a lot to the Mothman story, even though you can't simply write off every sighting. So, what does moving a horror story or mythology story into pop culture mean for Mothman moving forward? Sorry, guys. All right. We see these stories springing around all around the country, probably all around the world, especially America seems to really respond to its monsters. So you've got creatures like Bigfoot or the Dover Demon or the Jersey Devil, which is funny because the Jersey Devil does have its own horror movie, found footage, made in 1998, covered on it, I think, a couple weeks ago, and it's the last broadcast. So, anyways, so you don't see the transition in those cases in quite the same way you do with Mothman, where you go from it's really a regional media frenzy during the 1960s that dies off and then comes back to life in the early 2000s. And then it morphs into what it is today. If you can track all the way back to something like uh, Gardua or Banshees. It's even more fascinating because then you're dealing with centuries of stories and not just a few decades. So, the Mothman Legacy is now available streaming online through most major platforms. Let's see if it lists out which major platforms. If not, I'll just Google it and then I'll put it in the show notes for you guys. Okay, so there is a picture circulating about Monday, 21st, 2016. Man photographs creature that resembles legendary Mothman of Point Pleasant. And honestly, it kind of looks like a bird. So, hunters in Mason County may need to be on the lookout for something other than deer when they hit the woods this week. This is the news article. I'm sorry, guys. I will also link this down in the show notes. So, everything that I've been reading from, everything that I found my information from, will be linked down. And the streaming for the documentary, if you want to watch it, will also be linked down in the show notes. Ooh. So, Point Pleasant Mothman is a local legend that over the years has gained worldwide fame. There hadn't been any recent sightings of the red-eyed creature recently, but that changed Sunday evening when a man who says he was driving along State Route 2 saw something jump from tree to tree. He pulled off the road and snapped some photos. The man declined an on-camera interview, but was adamant the pictures had not been doctored. He said he recently moved to Point Pleasant for work and didn't even know about the legend. In the pictures, the creature appears to have wings and pointed tips and long legs that were bent at an awkward angle. Point Pleasant locals such as Carolyn Harris believes the pictures could be real because there have been so many other sightings over the years. I definitely know that Mothman is real, she states. Mothman obviously was reported sighting in Point Pleasant back in the 1966 time period, and then popular author John Keel popularized local folklore about the creature in his 1975 book. And then you have the movie that the book uh, was brought to life in 2002, which does have Richard Gere. Harris is on the Mothman. I want to go to the diner. Mothman Diner in Point Pleasant for 48 years. She also helped start the Mothman Festival. Harris says there's been too many sightings of Mothman for her to not believe. First responders and the sheriff's department that I talk have definitely made a believer out of me. Some believe Mothman is a bad omen, only appearing when a catastrophe is about to strike. There have been many claims of the winged, red-eyed creature was seen right before, obviously, the Silver Bridge collapse in 1967. Harris has met many Mothman believers over the years who visit her diner. On Monday, Karen and Ralph Smith were patrons at that diner. The couple were traveling from Florida to Pennsylvania, but decided to stop off at Point Pleasant to visit the Mothman Museum. Not gonna lie, I would too. Karen Smith says she hopes she can add herself into the believer category. You have eyewitnesses, and it does have the potential to be real, but I just want to believe, which is, anything. I think how most are with paranormal, supernatural, cryptid type of things. So the Smith said Mothman pictures look real to them. So Eyewitness News asked Jeff Walmsley, the local Mothman expert and owner of the museum. Walmsley said modern technology, it's impossible to know for sure if the pictures are real. Whether pictures are real or not, the benefits of the legend of the Mothman brings to the town of Point Pleasant is very real. It's a good thing. It brings a lot of people here. He's here to stay, Harris says. So, going from that, I do want to point out there are some Goatman. No, not Goatman. Sorry, guys. Okay. So, we've read all the folklore. We've heard about everyone who believes. Let's go into the analysis of Mothman, right? So we got folklorist Jan Harold Bruvenard, Bruvend, notes that Mothman has been widely covered in popular press, some claiming sightings connected with UFOs, other claiming that military storage sites was Mothman's home. So he notes that recountings of the 1966-67 Mothman reports usually states that at least 100 people saw Mothman, with many more afraid to report, but observed that written sources such as stories consisted of children's books or sensationalization, God, or undocumented accounts that failed to quote identifiable persons. He found that elements in common among many Mothman reports and much older folk tales suggest that something real may have triggered the scares and become woven into the existing folklore. He records that the anecdotal tales of Mothman supposedly attacking the roof of parked cars occupied by teenagers. Conversely, Joe Nickel says that a number of hoaxes have followed the publicity generated by the original report, such as a group of construction workers who tied flashlights to helium balloons. Nickel attributes the Mothman stories to the sightings of the barred owl, suggesting that the Mothman's glowing eyes were actually the red eye effect caused from the reflection of the light from flashlights or other bright lights and sources. Benjamin Rafford points out that the only report of glowing red eyes was secondhand in that of Shirley Hensley, quoting her father. One of the prevailing hypotheses, no, sorry, not hypnosis, associated with the Mothman at the time of the original sightings was that it was a misidentified sandhill crane due primarily to the size of the bird as well as the reddish flesh around the crane's eyes. Daniel A. Reed examined the migration patterns and historically reported sightings of sandhill cranes in the area of Point Pleasant and proposed that in cases where eyeshine was not noted, it was statistically more likely that the witnesses were seeing a misidentifying the great blue heron instead. According to the University of Chicago, which is so funny because there is, if you're a huge Josh Gates fan, I think everyone knows I am. Expedition X, I believe it's their first season. I'd have to look it up to definitely know. He sends his team out to go look into the reported sightings, 2020s, of the Mothman popping up in areas like Chicago. But anyways, okay, moving on. So according to the University of Chicago psychologist David A. Gallo, 55 sightings of Mothman in Chicago, oh, look at that, during 2017, published on the website of self-described 14 research Lon Strickler are a selective sample. Gallo explains that he's not sampling random people and asking if they saw Mothman. He's just counting the number of people that voluntarily came forward to report a sighting. According to Gallo, people are more likely to revisit a paranormal-centric website like Strickler's, might also have been more inclined to believe, therefore witnessed the existence of Mothman. Some pseudoscience adherents, such as ufologists, paranormal authors, and cryptozoologists, claim that Mothman was an alien, a supernatural manifestation, or previously unknown species of an animal. In his 1975 book, Keel claimed that the Point Pleasant residents experienced precognitions, including premonitions of the collapse of the Silver Bridge, UFO sightings, visits from inhuman or threatening men in black, and other phenomena. So there we are. Um, that's it for Mothman. Tell me what you think. I'm not really sure. I'm still on the edge about this because it does sound like a bird. Like whenever you look and you read and you think about it, like yeah. Although I'm gonna check out that documentary because I would like to see more in depth research as far as kind of matching it to folklores because I find that really intriguing because I love reading mythologies and folklores because for me with folklores and mythologies there's always some sort of truth behind it because obviously most of those have some sort of learning lesson or they were talking about some sort of creature or something that they just during that particular time period, so say like the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, um just a way to kind of explain and maybe deter people from certain bad behaviors. So, yeah. Anyways, so that's it tonight for tonight's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Um, as always, make sure you like and share this podcast, subscribe. I do have a link down below in case you want to buy me a beverage. It's the buy me a coffee link. So, you can do that. No obligation, but just saying. And other than that, I will catch you guys on the next episode. So, have a good night, guys. Alrighty, folks, it's time to bid you farewell for now, but fear not. I'll be back next Friday with even more mind boggling tales that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about the world. So, freaking awesome evening, sweet dreams if you dare. And don't forget to mark your calendars because the next thrilling episode of the Paranormal Misfit podcast is always a must listen.